Les jeux vidéo.
Vous trouvez pas que le gamin s'abrutisse déjà suffisamment avec ce genre d'idiotie? La seule chose que vous êtes capable, c'est de faire perdre notre temps.
Est-ce qu'on a vraiment besoin de leur thune? Ouais, jusqu'à maintenant, on a fait avec l'aide des contributeurs et on s'en est plutôt bien sortis.
Les jeux vidéo.
Tranquilo, Leo. Bueno,
no merecían que les pase eso después del partido siquiera. No, la verdad que no, que sufrimos demasiado exactamente. Ellos, banalmente que juega el fútbol, yo gente y empezó a tirar pelotazos. Y bueno, te meten pelotazo al área y te complica. No quiero hablar del árbitro porque después hay sensación, puede ser menos. Pero más allá de eso, tuvimos la suerte de los penales, que no merecíamos pasar por lo que se vio en el partido. Quizás no hicimos un gran partido, pero jugamos como teníamos que jugar. Y bueno, después el árbitro lo mandó a la prórroga.
One time.
Sound check. Hello, good morning, everybody.
I'd like you to take your seats. Lots of seats up front, so please feel free to move forward. This hall is rather cold, so we'll try to huddle and keep the body heat all centered as well. So for those of you who are sitting at the back, if you'd like to, please come closer to the front. That would be great, and then we can get started very soon. Once again, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining this session, which is the second part of a session that looks at financing the energy transition. And it will look at how the carbon markets can become an important climate finance stream to support energy transition and achieve low carbon development in the net zero transition. Now, if you have been actively following this week and the many events, you would see this really high interest in carbon pricing and carbon markets. And it's really just a snapshot of the global interest and the resurgence of commitment towards carbon pricing and carbon markets as well. So for this session, we will focus more specifically around this emerging rally on high integrity carbon markets. Now we will look at what this looks like and how countries and partners are shaping and responding to this discourse while weighing the pros and cons in the use of the NDCs. Now, the discourse around integrity on carbon markets have predominantly focused on the carbon elements. How are results real, additional, and verifiable, and to avoid double counting, which is all, of course, an important consideration. But what has been less visible is the role of social and environmental safeguards and their contributions to the broader sustainable development goals. For instance, all the work the country has put in terms of social environmental risk management, assessment, how the indigenous peoples and local communities are involved, cultural heritage, gender equity, grievance response mechanisms, benefit sharing mechanisms that are equitable. All these things have sort of not come to the forefront, right? And that's something we'd like to tease out a lot more. And of course, these are all the considerations that host countries supplying these potential carbon credits are considering. And on the demand side, we're seeing that high integrity also consists on corporate clarity around what they mean by net zero, carbon neutral claims such as the claims code prepared by the Voluntary Carbon Market Integrity Initiative. But before we get into this further with our panelists, I have the pleasure to invite our co-lead partner organization, Marcus Castro, the Regional Climate Liaison of South Asia, the Climate Change Group of the World Bank, to lay the ground for us in terms of what carbon markets in Asia Pacific looks like. Marcus, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to this session. Yes, my task now is to deliver a very short presentation just to set the scene and then highlight some of the key issues that I hope later on our distinguished panel will discuss and do along with you. So let me see. Do you have the presentation? And let me start with the very basics. Too much information in this presentation. So, as we all know, when we talk about carbon markets, the basis of the groundwork of the carbon markets are credits, carbon credits. And this, of course, is an oversimplification that started with the very basics. Can be generated from international mechanisms, of course, outside here the CDM, Article 6.4, domestic mechanisms, many jurisdictions that have introduced compliance markets and developed their own offset mechanisms, such as the California compliance offset program, Quebec compliance offset program, and also some national voluntary carbon market schemes like the Thailand ER program and the Thailand on this later on. And finally, the independent mechanisms, as you all know, independent mechanisms such as gold standard mechanisms that generate carbon credits to serve different market segments. And behind each of this, underlying each of these creating mechanisms, there's always this very basic scheme where you have an emissions reduction project or a carbon removal project. Choose one of the carbon mechanism standards, each one with different rules, modalities, but in essence always the same, a similar basic underlying cycle. The importance of independent third-party validation and verification to be able to, at the end of this standard cycle, issue these carbon credits. What I wanted to highlight here is that the use of the carbon credits is determined at the end of the day by the buyers based on what the seller has authorized, seller's authorization for the credits. And authorization here in capital letters has a very specific context, particularly in the context of discussion of the Article 6 of the UNFC regime. So as you will see, this is the basic. Sorry for the... To avoid distraction, let me get rid of all the animation. But it's getting more and more complex now with different market segments, with different uses. Sometimes it's difficult to keep focus on the different elements of this of the carbon creating world. And again, this is just an attempt to try to illustrate in one placemat all the different uses. If we start with the creating mechanism of standards, as I was saying, you have international creating mechanisms, domestic creating standards, and independent creating standards. You produce, you generate your carbon asset, your carbon credit, and then from a from a buyer's perspective, you can either use it to serve, the domestic carbon market or the international carbon market. When it comes to for the use at the national level, so domestically, here we also differentiate between use for compliance purposes. Let's say a jurisdiction that has introduced a carbon tax or an emissions trading system that also has provisions to use offsets or carbon credits to meet those compliance, the obligations of emitters covered by this system. And then, of course, you have buyers who buy these national credits for their own voluntary purposes, be it carbon neutrality, claims, or other philanthropic goals. And I think much of the discussion today will also focus on that aspect. And then internationally, there again, we need to differentiate between carbon credits that have been or will be authorized for international, and will be adjusted, and other credits that won't have this kind of host country authorization. As we all know, this is part of the huge effort that most, if not all, of the countries parties are doing right now to have their rules, their policy frameworks, their modalities in place to be able to determine when, if they participate in international carbon markets under Article 6 Article 6 cooperative arrangements, how to proceed with this authorization. And again, there are different usages depending on where you use this credits, depending on whether these are adjusted or not adjusted. So as you can see, it's simple, but at the same time, it's getting complex or confusing. Let me just move rapidly to, and I know, and I apologize if you cannot see the numbers, but this is just to highlight a little bit of the trends and of the figures. When we focus on voluntary carbon markets, of course, as we all know, this is mainly driven by these corporate net zero commitments. And as you can see here in this shape, how the demand for this, or the commitments of companies that have adopted science-based targets has increased over the last 3 to 4 years significantly. Even with that, the demand for carbon credits as part of their mitigation strategy. Something I wanted to highlight is, of course, this momentum in the last 2 years, in the last year, and more notoriously this year, has come a little bit into a pause, including, not limited, but including because of all this, this declining market sentiment, because of the concerns around greenwashing in the market among stakeholders. And I do think that's something that we want to discuss later in this panel in a little bit more detail. At the same time, as we all know, and thanks to the work of many of you here in the room and in this event, the compliance market are beginning to take more and more shape. Here again, this is an illustration from the World Bank State and Trends report this year, and I'm sure this is already not updated, because this was a snapshot of April. In the last few months, we've heard from about more and more of this Article 6 transactions or pilot programs, but you can see how, in terms both of number of engaged countries and in terms of transactions, how this is significantly increasing. So to conclude, and perhaps to set the stage for discussion now, as we can see, there are still some issues both in in compliance market under Article 6 and voluntary carbon markets, both in terms of the regulatory and institutional setup, in terms of also of the liquidity in the market, the legal nature of credits in the case of voluntary carbon markets, just to name few of the key issues that are still impacting the speed of the growth and the role of carbon markets to support mitigation objectives of countries and stakeholders. And this is, of course, right now accompanied with significant efforts to tackle those issues. And many of our panelists today are very much engaged, be it on the working on partnering with countries and companies in developing institutional setups, governance arrangements to enable access to international carbon markets, be it in developing the required market infrastructure, not only carbon emissions registries, but also some other key elements for the MRV, to be able to have a sound MRV architecture for the specific purpose of carbon markets, be it through the development and implementation of Article 6 or carbon, more broadly speaking, international carbon market strategy and corresponding national frameworks. So different dimensions, different layers of areas that need to be addressed to really enable or to really promote participation in international carbon markets and enhance the standards and transparency of these carbon markets. So with that, perhaps I hand over back to Selina.
Thank you so much, Marcus, and right on time. That is a feat. We're just going to get an extra chair on stage so we can start to invite our panelists to join us later on. Great. Can you please help to put the chair on the stage, please? Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very, very illustrious panel here for you today. And so you're going to hear a wide variety of views in terms of how countries and partners are navigating through all these complexities that Marcus has briefly illustrated for us. We have several of them, and as I mention your name, I would like you to start coming up on stage. First, we have Pawina Panichaya, who's the manager of the Thailand Greenhouse Gas Management Organization. Then we have Dr. Elizabeth Phillip, Head of Environment and Climate Change Program from the Forest Research Institute of Malaysia. And we have Mr. Hayato Nakamura, the Program Manager of Article 6 Implementation Partnership Center from the Institute of Global Environmental Strategies. And we also have Ms. Pasang Doma Sherpa, who's the director of the Center for Indigenous Peoples Research and Development, and she's also a former co-chair of the Facilitative Working Group of the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform of the UNFCCC. Of course, and we also have Mr. Ruben Manukara, the Assistant Director of Global Partnerships, National Climate Change Sector, Singapore, and last two but not least, Mr. V.K. Dugal, the Principal Climate Change Specialist in charge of the Climate Pricing and Carbon Markets Program from the Asian Development Bank, and of course, our partner in crime, Marcus Castro, our Regional Climate Liaison for South Asia and the Climate Change Group of the World Bank. It's really a long panel. I hope we don't fall off the stage at some point from the excitement. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time this morning. Now, let us get started with the first set of questions. And it's for our two countries seated here, our two ladies, powerful ladies from Thailand and Malaysia. So let me just ask you, both Thailand and Malaysia have made firm commitments toward net zero transition as you implement your nationally determined contributions. Could you describe how carbon markets play a role in this transition? And in the current context of high-integrity carbon markets, what does this mean in Thailand, what does this mean in Malaysia, and what additional policy actions are the governments of Thailand and the government of Malaysia putting in place to ensure high-integrity emissions reduction units are generated? So you will have between 5 to 6 minutes, and I've been asked to be a really strict timekeeper, so please bear with me. Kun Pawina, please.
What I would like to share is that in case of Thailand, we think that the predicting mechanism is one of the carbon pricing instruments that can help the project developer decide to invest in such a good project like to meet the net zero target we impose, that we will we have a specific technology that will be used in Thailand I mean the time frame that I propose in the long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategies. We have a technology that will be used in each time frame, like in 2025, 30, something like that, until 2065. That is our net zero target year. So we think that if the project developer can use the technology before that time period, I mean that year, like for in year 2025, we propose that the technology that we use in that year is the bioenergy and battery storage. This battery storage, like the solar power and battery, is equipped with battery or biogas, and also that can supply power to the grid. But one more thing, in case especially only for Thailand, that the Ministry of Energy who buy the power, they reserve the rights on the carbon credits. So maybe it's only the captive power producer who can get the incentive from the carbon market. So that's very special characteristic of Thailand. And we have another thing that our cabinet acknowledged the guidelines for carbon credit management, that the carbon credits that can use for international purposes shall be additional. So, and it will be strict with CDM, that additional means that it will be have like a regulatory surplus, and also it will be additional in investment aspect, or also have some technical barrier or first of its kind, something like that. That we also have this kind of criteria for in case that the project wants to get the carbon credits from their projects. And another thing is that it shall be additional, and it shall support our long-term LTLES, and also our national target that we propose in NDC. Because right now we are revising the action plans to meet our NDC target. And so what can develop for the can be registered under our program shall be additional than the measures that specify in the action plans.
Thank you so much. I think that was just the first part of the question. You still have 3 minutes, so I'm going to give you that extra time. Well, not extra time. But can you illustrate a bit that what you have just talked about are very concrete national plans to move forward, right? But all these discussions around high integrity, what is the government of Thailand and TGO thinking about that? And how are you positioning yourself to respond to those calls around high integrity carbon markets?
So high integrity is that we just follow the Article 6 RMP, I mean 6.4 RMP, and because we already have our domestic standard, but our domestic standard maybe is not. We have like some exception, like for the additionality test, the proof of additionality, we just use payback period 3 years. That is not enough, because we also submit a program for the evaluation to be an eligible program for 4 years. But we cannot pass it in year 2019. So we just resubmitted this year, and we already passed the evaluation because we add more rules according to the Article 6.4.
Thank you so much. That was a tough question, I know. Yeah, but you did well. Thank you. And onwards to Liz from Malaysia.
Thank you, and very good morning to all of you. On the onset for Malaysia's updated national determined contribution, we have said that we will not use markets. But moving forward towards low carbon development strategy and net zero aspiration, carbon markets potentially will play an important role. I just want to talk about the energy sector because that contributes 80%, almost 80% of our emissions, total national emissions. So I think most of you have heard this early this week. My minister talked about the national energy transition roadmap, which is ambitious. It had plans to emphasize on low carbon and net zero aspiration of the country and contribute to a reduction of up to 32% of our total emissions from the energy sector come 2050. That's a tall order, and there's 10 projects and 6 transition levers identified. And of the 6, I just like to touch on a few because of time constraint, like enhancing energy efficiency, renewable energy generation capacity to 70%, carbon capture, utilization and storage are examples where we need to access technology as well as some capacity building and innovations. And this is expensive based on the roadmap. It says it costs about 1.2 to 1.3 trillion ringgit Malaysia. So one of the ways actually to raise this money is definitely not from the national budget, but carbon market actually plays an important role here, and carbon pricing. So as all of you know, you have seen the sun and the rain and the storm last night, I believe. So we have lots of sun, we have lots of rain, we have lots of storm. So our RE capacity is rather limited. We don't have wind like many other countries do have. And though we have a lot of sun, we also have a lot of cloud. So we have some capacity, limited opportunity to generate RE. And I think in Malaysia, high-quality carbon projects, therefore, must be identified to actually attract investment into achieving these targets. And what does, to your question, what does high-quality carbon projects to Malaysia means is basically projects that demonstrate environmental, social integrity as well as transformative. It should be business not as usual, and their mitigation effects are real and permanent. And the other aspect that I always think is equally important is displacement of emissions or leakage need to be addressed, especially in CCUS and RE projects. When we talk about bioenergy, there could be some displacements, and we need to really look at that. That's where the consultative process within the energy transition roadmap would play a role. On what are some of the additional policy measures that we should look at, because we are a developing country, we start from the CDM, which was everything goes. You know, the national focal point did not have much role to play, except they approve, they look, they get the experts to verify and so on. But moving forward with the national aspiration, the 2050 net zero aspiration, there's a need to enhance our existing policy. We just had developed a policy that's just been in the process of being approved, but there are additional work that needs to be done, like building a robust national MRV system for tracking and validating carbon credits, developing national baselines so that the additionality part and hard-to-abate projects would be the first to be approved, and safeguards would need to be put in place to ensure integrity of every emission reduction units generated from the country. In addition to that, we also think that there should be institutional arrangements for monitoring of emissions reduction unit generation, and tracking cross-border sales is important. This was what also just now in the setting of the scene session, where we need to actually track what is sold across the border and how would it affect our own national balance. That's one part. And number two, which also is quite important for us, is the issue of double counting and double claiming. So there's a lot of debate in Malaysia about double counting and double claiming. At least we are clear double counting in the context of national NDC is clear, but what about the voluntary carbon markets? And how do we address some of this? So I'm very glad we only have 32 million population, and with 32 million population and a diverse community here, we have diverse views, and this really need to be really understood. So, so that will also actually link to what high integrity carbon emissions reduction unit would be. So that's what we think in the policy. But finally, I just want to sum up. The path to sustainable future is demanding for Malaysia, but is possible with astute strategies, global collaboration, and unwavering commitments with carbon markets to advance climate action. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. That is certainly a long list of very hard strategies and to-dos to put in place. Now, maybe just a quick point. What's the timeline for all that?
The national energy transition is up to 2050, but we have for each 10 years action plans. And this would be also looked in line with all the other policies, including the LTLETs and net zero aspiration.
Thank you. Let's move on to our next panelist, Mr. Hayato Nakamura, who's the program manager from the Article 6 Implementation Partnership Center. I need to get familiarized with that. So just to say that noting 77% of the NDCs state the intent to make use of international market mechanisms to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, the Article 6 Implementation Partnership Center has been established with a vision to support capacity building, including through mutual learning and sharing the activities of development and research partners working on Article 6. Now, the question for you, Mr. Hayato, is how far have countries in the Asia-Pacific region come to operationalize Article 6? And what key gaps do you see, especially, again, responding to this whole high integrity parameters at the moment that need further work? Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for having me for that panel. And thank you very much for the various presentation and also the remarks. And I understand the remarks from Malaysia covers many things actually. And that comes to our center to work. I mean, it's more like a pressure. Meanwhile, how countries in the region comes to the operationalize Article 6. According to the presentation from World Bank, so the Article 6, the system of Article 6, I mean, there's a lot of delay, so that it might be too early to say how far or whatever. However, like a compliance market or voluntary market, so there's so many practices so that we can learn from them. And the key gaps. But when saying the high integrity, so what is a high integrity? Of course, I mean, Thailand and Malaysia touched a bit, but we try to see more for example, this year, G7, Japan did chairmanship for local matters, and aside from the summit in Hiroshima, we had a minister meeting on this matter, carbon market, and also the energy matter in Sapporo last April. And as an outcome document from that meeting, and there's a principle of the high integrity of the carbon market. And it's defined the 3 dimensions. One is the supply side integrity, which includes of course, they contribute to the host country of the greenhouse gas emission, but also like environmental integrity, including COSIA, and also the transparent governance, ESIA, environmental impact, social impact assessment, human rights, indigenous people. So that comes more like everything for the development works. While the second thing is the demand side. The integrity, which should be more like a science-based, and also as doing trading, so that the amounts should be reduced by having a trading on the carbon market and using the carbon market. And the third thing is that more like a market side integrity, including registry, transparent arrangement, and also the certificate, of course, the double counting. So the innovation for the certificate system is very, very important in the future. So that those kind of things comes as a parameter for the high integrity of the carbon market. And in that sense, we are tasked to talk every partners regarding the capacity gap, all those kind of things. So that actually the process just started. Of course, we understand that various donors has implemented some work, but during this conference, and sometimes we did bilateral meetings, so we feel like the assessment or the monitoring of the capacity building itself is sometimes necessary, or it's more like just, the coverage of the people. Of course, the countries to be observed. Of course, I understand the various research paper or whatever comes out from this type of work, but talk with the countries, and we need to see design the package for the support for the capacity building. So that's what we are thinking at this moment. Of course, avoiding overlaps with already made, but we try to bridge the gap as a center secretariat. So that's what we are thinking at this moment. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that sounds like also quite a lot of work to identify gaps that have not yet been filled, right? But I'm sure in talking to the countries, there will be that specific niches that will come out. So it would be very exciting to watch this space further on. Thank you so much. Now, Pasang, I don't think it's by coincidence that somehow you're seated right in the middle of this panel, right? And Pasang, a lot has been said about high integrity carbon markets, which consists of social integrity as well as environmental integrity and carbon elements. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you are one of the members of the steering advisory committee of the art trees, or let me take a breath, the architecture for REDD+ transactions, the REDD+ environmental excellence standards, ART-trees in short, which is promoting a jurisdictional and national REDD+ approach for forest and land use sector. Now, as a representative of the indigenous peoples, how does it reflect the values and priorities of indigenous peoples? And what roles and responsibilities could indigenous peoples play to ensure that you are not left behind as countries scale up high integrity carbon markets? Now, Pasang, I know when your engine gets going, you keep going. I will give you time. You have 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Selina. And Tashitile, namaskar. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for your invitation. And based on my experience and knowledge, I will be happy to share that on the bear with my on the need of and the priority of the high integrity that has been focus of today's panel. And with my many thanks for this initiation that is one of the bases actually for respecting the human rights of indigenous peoples and local communities who have been really working on the ground for protection, promotion, continuation, and sustaining the intact of the resources, biodiversity, and ecosystem. And you know, how could we move ahead with a market-based approach, you know, without considering the role and contribution the indigenous people and local communities have carried over for generations on the ground, you know? And just considering the role and contributions for that one, we cannot just take the bullet train movements of carbon initiation that we have seen around the world by leaving indigenous people, local community, women, youth behind. It has to be done parallelly basis. It has to be done equal basis, on equal footing basis. And the speed that we have seen at the moment is a really huge gap. And I believe that gap can be fulfilled with you know, approach of high integrity, not just only focusing on the environmental integrity, but also the social, cultural, spiritual, all connection. Because for indigenous people, forest is not just the carbon sequestration pool, but it is spiritually, culturally, you know, it's connected. No, anything happen with the forest happens to the communities as well, and that part is being captured and respected to live with the identity, humanity, and with the ownership of continuity by next generation. So Marcos is right that it looks simple, but it's so complicated, no? And every time I try to understand, I think like I understand, but then I even close my eyes and I feel like I understand nothing. No, that was the matter experience since end of 2008 or 2009 when we have involved in the REDD+ mechanism, you know, because I already served to the, you know, participant committee and UN REDD and other sectors. Now with the trees, you know, with the working on the standards, and I have been putting all my effort because this safeguard is based on the principles of the Paris agreements, and then also capture the essence of all safeguards, social environment safeguards. We have worked in the REDD+ with the, you know, FCPF and worked on well, UN REDD, and it has to be carried over and along with the Paris agreements, no, and the Cancun safeguard. It cannot be forgotten, no, because we need to move ahead with the lessons learned or our experience from the past, which cannot be forgotten, which need to be balanced, and which need to balance and learn from the past experience to make it more high integrity. And for indigenous peoples, just only social and environmental integrity is not enough. No, the tenure issues, the land tenure issue, the forest tenure issues is one of the basic fundamentals for protection of our knowledge system, protection of our culture and values, and that is the basis for sustainability. No? And then and I feel like somehow in the volunteer carbons, somehow is the bullet train speed has somehow forgotten that essence, and that need to be considered fully. Otherwise, it cannot really successful. It will maybe temporarily successful, but long term will regret to make a big mistake. That part. And here also in Johor, the caucus of International Indigenous Forum on Climate Change, we have massively discussed, and unless and until we respect the indigenous people rights in line with our symbiotic relation with the forest and land tenures, we cannot move ahead with the carbon credit. And the pathway is the same momentum, we are move ahead. So I really believe that, let's take a momentum, stop and close your eyes, and are we in the right path? And the path we are moving ahead is not. So this is why we need to pause ourselves and think about it, the implication on the ground. We have been taking the biggest bear soldiers for continuity. And then another part is also, we also need to think about it, benefit sharing mechanism. The existing benefit sharing mechanism looks so promising. However, if we see really closely, the architect hardly sees, like in the practical reality, when you go to the community or when you work with the reality, this architect, even 80% going to the result-based payment and going to the market and going to the community, looks so like illusionary, because the mechanism has been produced in such a way the recipients need to be legally binding or legally legally recognized. And when we see like indigenous people's customary institution and governance system is not legally binded. So how would you ensure that the benefit sharing mechanism will ensure the benefits goes to the indigenous community? So we have a lot of homework to be done. We have a lot of capacity to build up, the capacity of indigenous people and local community, not limited to that one, but capacity of the decision makers, stakeholders, government agency, bilateral, multilateral agency who are involved in this carbon emission, and carbon initiation or carbon markets, and support for the communities for insurance, assurance of the recognition of our rights. And this needs to be recognition, not just only legal recognition, but academic recognition as well, and bringing young generation, faculties, researchers to think about it and support on this. Thank you.
Right on time. Right on time, Pasang, you're getting better and better. Thank you so much. But your point on indigenous peoples as partners, not just victims, not just recipients, and simply because you do have a lot to offer, traditional knowledge, social, cultural, spiritual values, that is a message that is coming through loud and clear. And we're very glad for the work of the IP caucus and in ensuring there is a consistent dissemination, so thank you. And perhaps we'll come back to you a bit later if there are questions on the ground. Now onwards to Ruben, I think it would be an understatement to say Singapore has been causing ripples, through the stand that you have, or the lead that you have taken in scaling up carbon markets in Asia Pacific, not only by setting up a conducive environment for private sector players, but also setting frameworks on the use of markets and carbon credits domestically. So recently you have unveiled an international carbon credit framework, which allows carbon tax liable companies to use eligible ICCs to offset up to 5% of their taxable emissions as from 1st of January next year. Now, could you walk us through a bit in terms of the thought process of how Singapore decided on these eligibility criteria, and how is it ensuring high integrity? Over to you.
Thanks. Thanks, Selena, and thanks for also having me on the panel as well. Very thankful and appreciative of that. Just to pick up on your point of how Singapore has participated in the market and we're helping to develop the market, I think we participate insofar as we participate together with partners. So Singapore is not in this alone. We work very closely with many different partners, and that's a key element. of the frameworks as well as the work that we're developing. And just to, and also to answer your question on, so what was the thinking behind and the policy considerations in coming up with our carbon credit framework, but also our eligibility criteria that we released about 2 weeks ago. And just to pick on, and also to pick on Pasang's point, I think the starting point was how can we learn from past experiences? How can we build on what we have learned? Well, what are the best practices currently available? And for that, we looked at what was the previous version of Article 6, so the CDM. The lessons learned, a lot of institutional knowledge has gone into it, but also fully recognized that it had some way to go, and that's what the impetus was in the developing of Article 6. So that was one aspect we looked at. And the other aspect that we looked at is also what other credible international benchmarks are out there. So one example would be CORSIA. ICAO's CORSIA scheme, we looked at it, we looked at the principles behind it, and we adapted those international benchmarks in developing our own eligibility criteria, and that's key. And so just to share, so when we released the criteria, we were very certain that 7 principles had to be adhered to, and many of it was covered in Liz's sharing as well. So to share, firstly, there has to be no double counting. That is one of the core elements of Article 6, and any ITMOs are correspondingly adjusted for. The second, of course, is that it's additional. It goes above host country NDCs or beyond host country NDCs. That's crucial. And the third, and this very often criticisms of land use related projects as well, is that emissions reductions are real, right? And the fourth is that, related to the conversation that we've had on tracking and accounting earlier in this panel, is that the emissions are quantified and verified. And the fifth element, and also a very important conversation that's happening right now, and very often carbon credit projects come under scrutiny for that, is that the emissions reductions are permanent, or where they're not, the reversals are accounted for. And the sixth is on leakage, especially again related to land use. This is a key problem, but I'm very heartened that real progress has been made on that front, right? So for example, in the forestry sector, Singapore has said that for certain project classes, we'll only accept credits that adopt a jurisdictional or national approach, because that is a credible pathway to reducing leakage, right? And the seventh element is to pick on what Pasang said as well, is that the project or the activity results in no net harm. And that including biodiversity co-benefits, rights of indigenous communities, so on and so forth. So these 7 principles form the bedrock of what Singapore determines to be high quality and carbon credits. But saying that, we can't look at, our perspective is also that we can't look at environmental integrity in an isolation. So we see it, and if you can think about it, it's in 3 pillars that support it. The first is, of course, the infrastructure to support this. And what do I mean by that? I mean having mechanisms to effectively track the flow of credits. Fully recognizing that with private sector being on board, with many countries being on board, carbon credits can be traded through multiple hands. But what's important is that there's full transparency throughout the process, and buyers are aware of what they're buying, and when they retire, the credits are retired and not used again. And on that, what Singapore has done is that we have worked with the voluntary market standards, gold standards, FERAS, GCC, and many others, to standardize taxonomies and workflow processes, so that among the players, really it's clear when we say, when we are transferring, what do we mean? When we are retiring, what do we mean? Because anyone who has tracked the Article 6 negotiations would know that half the time is spent just trying to figure out what each other means, right? And that's also true for private sector. So that's one aspect. Another aspect that we're working with the World Bank on is on the NITA, and the Carbon Action Data Trust. How do you create a system, not a meta registry system, but a data layer that captures carbon credits from both the voluntary and compliance that are flowing throughout, right? So at any point in time, it's a global public good. Anyone can go and view in the system where this credit was in use, where it's been traded, has it been retired, so on and so forth. So that forms the first element. And the second element is on recognizing that this is a work in progress. And continuing efforts need to be put in development. And what do I mean by development? So just to share an example, one aspect would be to work within current mechanisms to enhance current methodologies, right, and current programs. So for example, Singapore is an active supporter and participant in the Article 6.4 supervisory bodies, but we also work through CORSIA, part of their technical advisory body, to try and elevate existing methodologies, programs, and standards to make sure that we all reach to an outcome that is high environmental integrity. But beyond that, we also recognize the need to work outside these mechanisms and unlock some credit classes that are transformative. And this is a principle that Singapore holds true, which is that the point of carbon credits is to bring about transformation. It's about to channel financing flows not in BAU stuff, but into areas that can transform mitigation outcomes. And with that, it's important that methodologies are developed to bring about that transformation. So for example, in the lead up to COP28, Singapore, together with many other partners, are pioneering coal transition credits, recognizing that it is an important part of energy transition. I think Liz covered Malaysia's plan for energy transition, but coal is a huge problem in Asia, right? So how can we use credits to transform the energy sector in Asia? And the third pillar, and covered by many of my panelists as well, is on capacity building. Article 6, is the name itself, is a cooperative approach. Right? You need both countries or both parties, if part of the cooperative approach, to have the capacity to engage effectively in markets. And that's a key element. So, sorry, Selina, a long-winded answer to your question. But so these are the key elements of what Singapore considers to be high environmental integrity credits, fully recognizing that a standard alone is not going to bring the market to where it is, but you need these supporting elements. And underpinning the supporting elements, partnerships working with private sector, indigenous communities, academia, and of course other countries to push the market in the right direction. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ruben. And I really like how you've really laid out all the basic building blocks, right? And it all comes together as a supportive ecosystem, because that's what it is, you know, in order to make this work. And I'm hearing refrains of transformative change, partnerships going through all these panels. So that's really encouraging, and thank you for that. Moving on, we have VK from ADB. And the question for you and Marcos are the same. So we have a compare and contrast questions for the both of you. So you have witnessed how the compliance and voluntary carbon markets diversify and become more complicated with new investors, financial products, technological platforms, and service providers. Now with this convergence around high integrity, what emerging responses do you expect to see from host countries? And what are some of the most critical gaps that need to be addressed as a priority? 6 minutes. VK, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Elena. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me here. Happy to be partners in crime. Lovely to see many colleagues and old partners and friends in the audience. It's lovely to get connected. I'll pick up from where Marcos left in his presentation on the landscape of carbon markets. The landscape of carbon markets is really emerging and evolving. It's getting complex. You know, we saw on the slide that we are talking of compliance markets, we are talking of voluntary markets, we are talking of sectoral markets like aviation sector, and also over and above the domestic carbon markets. So, of course, there are different interlinkages and overlaps. So that makes the life of people who are looking at carbon markets even more complex, but at the same time more interesting. So I think the policymakers really need to wrap their head around how to take advantage of different carbon market opportunities that are emerging. But I'll pick up on Ruben what he was saying. We really don't need to reinvent the wheel. I mean, we have a whole bunch of expertise and experience, especially in Asia and the Pacific, on the use of international and even domestic carbon markets. We had the largest number of CDM projects hosted in Asia and the Pacific. We have the advantage of JCM, the Joint Crediting Mechanism initiated by the government of Japan. The largest number of JCM projects are in the region, and that is, I would say, it's a forerunner for Article 6.2. If countries are looking how to take advantage of 6.2, JCM is a living example. So we really don't need to reinvent the wheel, and there's a lot of methodological work done, experience, but at the same time we need to build on the experience and probably some of the shortcomings of the previous mechanism like CDM. And I'll pick up on one, which is the environmental integrity. In CDM time there were certain projects and programs where the environmental integrity was kind of questionable, and I think that's where the world needs to really pick on and build on the how do we not make the mistakes that we made last time around, and build that into the new systems and procedures within the countries, including development of the projects. So specifically to your question, Selena, what are the emerging responses? I would like to take one step back and request all the policymakers to actually pick up on Malaysia's experience. Why do we need carbon markets to start with? Carbon markets are not an end by itself. Carbon markets are a means to reach somewhere. And in this context, we are talking about the energy transition. So I think what countries need to do is to think strategically what are the barriers that they want to overcome through the carbon finance that could be mobilized through international carbon markets. So I think that's what is very important. It is very well established, and that's what we learned from the previous markets, also including from JCM, that carbon markets can provide that very important financial incentive which can help countries and corporates to overcome the barriers to different low carbon technologies and solutions. And so therefore countries need to wrap their head around and make very coherent strategies how they would like to use markets. That's number one. And number two, countries would need to make strategies in terms of how they would like to use markets, which sectors, what are they going to, which sectors they would like to provide incentives, which sectors they would like to use for their NDCs, which sectors they would like to allow exports or imports, depending upon which side you are, and also to develop national frameworks. And very important, I think this is what we learned from the previous generation of markets. How do you communicate with the stakeholders? I think that's very important. It is very important to send a clear signal to the private sector. At the end of the day, you are trying to mobilize investments from the private sector in those low carbon technologies. And if you want to bring about carbon market incentives, it is very important that the private sector gets a right signal that there is a proper conducive environment available from the government side. And the third point that I will need to pick up is on the sustainable development impact. It's very, very important. We are just not looking at the tons of CO2 alone. It is very important that the benefits reach to the local stakeholders and the communities in which the projects are involved. And I would like to conclude with the last point here is that when countries develop their strategies, which we would like to encourage them to look in what buyers are looking for. So it is very important, and we got to hear from Ruben's perspective, and we have previous experience, and ADB has been buying credits for its carbon funds, and we have been putting a price on the sustainable development impacts, not just on the tons of CO2. There's a whole bunch of experience available out there, and the buying community has always been, and I think will continue to be, looking very carefully on what kind of impacts that those projects and those credits are making for the local communities and beyond. So I think all these things will contribute to the point that has been made about the environmental integrity. Environmental integrity, to my perception, is not just about making corresponding adjustment, which is very important. It's very important, but it is much beyond, as been highlighted by the previous speakers. So I'll stop here.
Marcus, you have the hard task.
I was going to say, you put me in a very, very difficult spot. Following VK after his very eloquent summary, and before Perumal, who I guess will also give us very insightful spots. So I don't want to repeat some of the very key points that were raised and discussed by all the panelists. The one point that I wanted to highlight, exactly the one point that Vicky just mentioned and stressed, the importance of countries now to really also, once the international framework is being set up, it's still being developed now, to look back and also determine their own strategies, their own policy frameworks, and with that, you know, if you go into the details, the different modalities, procedures to support a different carbon asset development cycle, and determine what is the best strategic position in terms of accessing these carbon markets, which sectors, which technologies. And each jurisdiction has its own priorities, its own circumstances, and will know best what is the best entry point. As we were discussing on Monday in our panel, at the end of the day, this current split, compliance, voluntary, I mean, this is just one early phase of the still evolving next generation of carbon markets. At the end of the day, in many ways, they're all converging to one direction. They will all fold in. It's really all about having like high integrity carbon credits, and then you will see where which kind of demand you will meet, and which kind of supply you will look after.
Great, thank you for giving us extra time and also concluding that part. Let me just turn now to the audience. Perhaps we can just take a few questions first and see what's really percolating and what's really burning before we invite Perumal to share some thoughts. Do we have any takers from the floor? Any brave souls out there on day 4? Yes. If you could come close to the mic, introduce yourself, and if you could state who you would like to answer your question, or if it's to all the panels, please do so. The floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Johan Nylander. I work for Neyen Consulting. I have a question, I think, for the whole panel, and by the way, it's very nice to see such a broad panel. I think when we're saying that, sorry, the carbon market development has been delayed because these decisions came so late, etc. There is one thing that I think also is key here, but it's not always mentioned, and that is that the whole system of the Paris Agreement with the NDC is new. So, as Vicky said, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, and there's a lot to build on, but we also have a new wheel, and that's the NDCs. And as a worst case example that I can mention is that I've been to countries talking to ministry staff, and they hardly know what the NDC targets are. They don't know how to implement them. And how can they then develop a carbon market strategy to get that integrated with development of the NDC? Okay, but that's the worst case. But I think one part of the delay here is also that countries really need to understand their NDCs and how they can implement the NDCs. So that, I think, I would like to hear the panelists' view on is how do you see this also as part of the delay of the carbon market, so as it were. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have another question? Yes, Pak Dola, if I'm not mistaken.
Good morning. My name is Dola. I am the orang asli from Malaysia. So I want to question to my Malaysian panels. Okay. The carbon market is a new thing for us, the orang asli. There are many things we don't know about related matters. But what is the more important in this matter is how the right of the orang asli, especially the land right, can be legally protected in the carbon project. Because so far the customary land is, or at least not been recognized by the government as our land, and still as a state government land. My question is, how can this carbon market can bring good news for us? Because there are many differences between Malaysian policy and international policy. So that will deny the orang asli right. Can you understand?
Thank you, Dola. Do we have any more before I turn back to the panel? Yes, I think the gentleman at the back was first. Yes, you.
Thanks for this very interesting conversation. In the private sector space,
Sorry, excuse me, if you could introduce yourself
certainly.
and
My
your
name's
organization.
Julian Vincent. I'm a Goldman Environmental Prize recipient from 2022. Thanks. In the private sector space over the last decade, we've seen an accelerating trend of institutional investors, insurance companies, banks restricting and even prohibiting finance to companies and projects that are deemed inconsistent with the goals of the Paris Agreement. I just wondered if any of the panelists are concerned that this may replicate itself in the public space when we're looking at the use of carbon markets and other transitional financing mechanisms, where we're talking about nations that are still expanding the scale of the fossil fuel supply, or otherwise have targets and plans that are inconsistent with the goals of the Paris Agreement, whether that is considered a risk to integrity of carbon markets, and if there's any concerns among the panel that that may inhibit the flow of finance through carbon markets. Thanks.
Thank you. Let me now turn to our panelists. So we have three questions, one in terms from Nayan, in terms of the implications of the NDC, you know, how that is working out as countries are grappling with it. And then we also have one question from Adola about the lack of recognition for land tenure, especially for Orang Asli. And then the last question in terms of how countries as a whole are going to respond to and not duplicate what the complexities that is seen there. Now, I'm looking, and everyone's avoiding my eye gaze, so we know how excited our panelists are. This is like being back in class, right? When you avoid someone's eye gaze. But do we have a brave soul that wants to start off first with any of these questions? Yes, BK. Gold star.
Yes,
well
thank
done.
you. Yeah, I'll pick up the first one from Johan, since he named me on his question. Thank you, Johan. That's a good question, actually. Yeah. So for the NDC implementation, I'll connect to the point that I was trying to make earlier, that that markets are not an end by itself. It is means to reach somewhere. And I think countries definitely need to look into their NDC targets and make a plan. How would they like to accomplish that? And certain actions can be done with the domestic action, certain for them. And some actions would certainly need support from international carbon markets. So I think it is very important, that can be a good starting point for countries to make a detailed plan to achieve their NDC targets. And of course, this is quite understandable that only when they achieve their NDC targets will they be able to raise the ambition over a period of time. But carbon markets cannot be an answer to the entire NDC accomplishment plan. So I think countries need to look at what are the different options and possibilities and support systems that they can, how can they mobilize resources, including those domestically, including the access to advanced low carbon technology transfer or development of indigenous technology, building capacity, so on and so forth. So, and where does carbon markets fit into that strategy to get some kind of additional source of funding that can help them to overcome the barriers? So that would be my pick in terms of connectivity of the international carbon markets to the NDC plans. Thanks.
Thanks, VK. Any other takers on any of the questions?
Thank you. I also wanted to speak to the NDC, as I started off saying. Our first NDC, we had said we will not use market mechanisms. The reason being is because we thought we should lead by example. So we start with national processes. And as we move towards low and net zero aspiration, then we know it's for sure we would need to access the market, to actually access technology, has been rightfully mentioned. So that was the reason. And having said all this, between our INDC to our first updated NDC, we had 5 governments change. And between our updated NDC to, as I speak today, we have 3 governments. And with that also we had, we are in between our policy change, because our policies are usually done every 10 years. So 2020, most of our policies ended. So when we did our assessment in 2015 and 2016, it was basically up to 2020, and we knew what roughly was going to be post-2020. But now we are in 2023, we see there's a lot of changes in our policy, and along the way, it will improve and we will change. And that's what someone mentioned, I think Ruben, it's work in progress, and it's always work in progress, and we are still updating our NDC. That's the first part, and I do believe at different points the market would play an important role. And on that premise also, I think, I'm sure last year we launched our Bursa carbon exchange, which is actually to incentivize private sector to reduce their carbon footprint and also to go to market mechanism to get the required funding. On the rights of Orang Asli, thank you for that question. You are right. It is somewhat unclear. Actually, there is laws to this, but there are implementation gaps. I do admit on that. However, I think there are different spaces where this has been discussed. And at least I speak for the Ministry of Natural Resources, Environment and Climate Change. We do actually have a lot of consultations with the Orang Asli, and we always take your needs into consideration, and we do have those kind of information. Even our access to benefit sharing law is translated to the Orang Asli's language. That's how serious we take this when it comes to benefit sharing. And I think when it talks about carbon markets, primarily yours would be the forest carbon markets. And many states had spoken, many state governments are talking about this. So perhaps I believe when they are developing their carbon market strategies, they would engage the Orang Aslis. The last question was on policy. Was it? What was the last question on policy?
The complexities in the private sector.
Yeah, the complexities, yes. Well, NDC is complex. LT-LETS is complex. Net zero is even more complex. On top of it, we have a complex government and complex community. So everything is complex to start off with, right? So I think what is important is basically we should start to learn to crawl first. Take what we can chew. I think that's the option at least Malaysia has. What we should do is deal with what is most important for us first, and how can we achieve our aspirations, what matters first, and then try to digest this to make it less complex, perhaps. So that's my simple answer to a complex question and a complex scenario. Thank you.
That's a very complex answer. Thanks so much, Liz. Ruben?
Thanks, Alina, and also VK and Liz for buying us time. Just to pick on the first question and the third question, absolutely agree, Johan, that NDC is the starting point, right? I think when I covered the 7 principles, the principle of additionality speaks exactly to that, right? The point of markets is to channel finance to activities that are beyond NDCs, right? Or outside your NDCs. And agree completely that capacity building activities are needed on that. And before countries develop their carbon market strategy, they need to be clear of what's their current and also future NDCs, right? But saying that, and fully recognizing that as well, the current carbon market system is moving towards a system where procedural safeguards are being put in place to recognize that complexity and the capacity gap that countries have in building their capacity, so in building their NDCs. So for example, in the Article 6.4 conversation is going on of, is there, what are your approval cycles for countries, right? So in that sense, the country can say, okay, I know I can mitigate my risk for the next 5-10 years, right? And if I then recognize that, oh, this is now within my NDC, or this is now I need to include within my NDC, the country is fully within the prerogative, the host country, to say, I will not authorize such activities anymore. Similar, in the voluntary market, you have project approval cycles as well, right? Where the project developer has a certain amount of time they can credit for, after which they need to apply for renewals, right? So within existing carbon market mechanisms, there are procedural safeguards in place to recognize the complexities of additionality and how we can achieve that. So my sort of pitch would be that in developing the carbon market strategy, also recognize that there are mechanisms in place, and how can countries leverage that mechanisms in place in coming up with that carbon market strategy. And the third point that I believe related to the point of how do we recognize and also mitigate some of the effects of the inhibitors to participating in carbon markets. So for example, we see this already in companies, right? So for example, some mechanisms like the energy transition accelerator that the US has, for example, right? That is a great initiative, but it restricts buyers, right? So it, for example, says that companies, if you want to participate in this, you have to be SBTi compliant, which is exactly the point that, you know, you need to be aligned with the 1.5 degree pathway to achieve that. I think when we talk about countries, it's slightly more complex, right? But saying that is complex, but it's also part of the Paris Agreement, right? In Article 6, it's very clear that countries committed to 1.5 degrees and keeping 1.5 degrees alive, and actions to that effect. Whether we will actually go to an era where you have bias, a buyer criteria being limited, I think we're a long way from that. And that's partly because Article 6 and the UNFCCC is a party-driven process, and it's a consensus-driven process. And when countries have a sovereign choice of whether they want to participate in markets or not, you might have other mechanisms within that, and that's the essence of why, one of the reasons why you have different mechanisms within Article 6, Article 6.2, Article 6.4. So you might have a stage where some elements flow within other mechanisms, but not all mechanisms. So that's one possibility of it.
Great, thank you. And we have Pasang and Kun Pawina as well. I believe there was one more question from the floor. Could I just see a show of hands? Just so one, anyone else? Two? Okay, so we have two more questions from the floor, but before that, Pasang?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. Some of the questions is already responded. I'll just add a little experience with the possible hope that especially recognition of the land tenure security. So I just visited Costa Rica before I come here in Johor. And I was sharing with Selina yesterday that some of the best practices we need to learn as a lessons to be possible way out from away from this complex mechanism that we have already experienced. When I was in Costa Rica, we had a field visit, and it was really amazing because to see that government in Costa Rica realized how important role and contribution of indigenous people there. And what I heard, like during the colonial time, the lands were taken away. But after the country got freedom and after high illegal logging and deforestation and also poaching, but the government started realizing the forests nearby the indigenous communities are still intact. And realizing the role and contribution of indigenous peoples for intact of the forest and biodiversity, the government of Costa Rica, they started having the recognition of the land territories of indigenous people, and now they have already have that recognition of their land rights, and their indigenous territories is already mapped out and already declared, and they have also the Forest Act that recognize. And and now the government also give the payment for ecosystems money. With the money, they started again buying from the land which has been taken away by the private companies. So with that one, they started even with the REDD+, but they translated REDD+ in their own way. We do not have to stick with the REDD+, but the aspiration taken by the REDD+ is already there because of their experience, their governance and practices, and now they're ready. And even the government, anything to do with the carbon, the climate finance or anything with the mitigation adaptation, we need to get a consent and work with the community. And that kind of collaboration, I could see it, can be replicated any part of the world, especially land tenure security. Let me go back to even in India experience. I visited a couple of the communities, a few months back, and the Forest FRA, the Forest Rights Act 2006 of India, has given the opportunity for reclaiming your ancestral domain. Even in the even in the national park, even inside the national park conservation, they can reclaim their ancestral domain, and the mapping out is already started. And some of the examples was really it's really amazing how women leadership already started demarcating their ancestral domain and started intact of the resources, and that can be another experience. And I'll go back to my own country, Nepal. I was one of the team working on the benefit sharing mechanism in Nepal, working for the government. And I put all my hook and crook experiences to make sure that higher benefit goes to the communities, especially with the indigenous peoples, women's local communities, especially those who are dependent on the forest. And we really made sure that at least 5% goes directly to the customer institution. And when we had the final benefit sharing plan, that consumer institution disappeared somewhere in the air, and that really frustrated me. And then I spoke with the governments, I spoke with the World Bank team, and one of the bases for not having customer institution directly at the beneficiary mechanism is because it's not legally recognized. And then I see the challenges. Then we really work, my organization, the CPRET, Center for Indigenous People Research and Development, we really work with the local government partnership. So we have started working with more than 100 local municipality and rural municipality, working very together, considering the Constitution of Nepal, Local Operational Act 2015, given the provision of you can develop your own local forest act. And now we have already we already started in 35 municipality with example, and we are moving ahead more than 100 at the moment. And now we already have the Local Forest Act that recognizes indigenous people customary tenures, local forest tenures, and which is part of the second submission of the NDC, because and that is in the emission reduction from forest and energy, especially in forests. That is one of the target of the government of Nepal. And now we have a little space that indigenous people, local communities, and the government can have a forum for negotiation. How can we move ahead with the climate finance with the tenure rise? Thank you.
Thank you, Pasang. Those are very, very practical life examples, right? And to show how we move forward. Kun Pawina?
I just want to share the case of Thailand that for a project that want to be registered under domestic program, like for especially for premium tier standard, it shall be passed the almost everything that Ruben just shared with us, that it shall be for this passing the safeguarding principle, and also the proof that there will be no harming to do no net harm to the local communities, and also concerned with the human rights of the people. So I think that for projects that want to be registered, they shall pass every examination on these issues. And especially if you want to be authorized by the government, and because the government need to do the corresponding adjustment. And in case of Thailand, we have the NDC action plans that is proposed by the responsible agencies. So before the request of authorization go to the cabinet, it shall be considered by the responsible agencies. So it means that no agency will approve the activities if it included in the action plans. So it shall be additional. I mean, from the mitigation, from the action plans, because if they're inside the plan, they need to find more mitigation measures in order to meet their target. So in case of Thailand, the responsible agencies is very serious about which activities they will be approved for the authorization. So that's what we do in Thailand.
Thank you. And it's really good to hear more about this premium TVER that Thailand is thinking of, right? Thank you so much. We had 2 more questions, right? So if you could just please bear with us. For the sake of time management, we'll just take this as a final round. Some quick responses. We had the gentleman in gray, yes? Your name, your organization, and if you have a specific panelist you've taken a liking to, that you would like to direct your questions. Thank you.
I'm happy to be here. My name is Daryl. I'm from Malaysia, Sabah. I have several organizations, so I don't know which one to use. But I'm an interested party, let's say, and I appreciate all the panelists, so it's open to all the panelists to answer this. Given that the issue of double counting is still alive, and given that the voluntary carbon credit schemes is under constant attack, and given that we haven't finalized all the rules around VCS and compliance and et cetera, isn't there a danger that given that the voluntary carbon market is flourishing, I have people knocking at my doors all the time, asking to get deals and such, isn't there a danger that once this carbon, that the carbon market, voluntary market is flourishing, it will constrain the rules from being created to deliver the highest credibility?
That was a mic drop moment. Thank you. Very good question, and I can see our panelists' brains swirling and like, who's going to take this up? And we had this gentleman here as well. If you could come up to a mic.
Hello. Good morning. Thank you very much. My name is Pem Kandel. I work for the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development as a Chief Policy Advisor. So my question would be about, this is not the question, just I would like to, convey the message that we have some experience and what is the direction to make this carbon credit and market more smooth. So carbon credit and market is the important policy direction of Paris Agreement under the Article 6. That is very good to mitigate the climate change. And but the complexity are there to operationalize this mechanism that we have already realized, and Marcos also rightly presented about this matter. We are talking about the carbon market and its integrity that demands set of reliable and rational standard. But the issues are, a lot of issues are there. Interest and implication are different in the different carbon market mechanism. That means multilateral institutions have different interest and different, standard. So that is one issue. And also private sector, they are looking to sell their, carbon or involved in carbon credit and marketing mechanism. But they have also different, standard and interest. Of course, country, Pasang has rightly mentioned that there are different interests, though countries are sovereign for their carbon marketing, but the local level or national level institution and policies are very complex. So with this, context, I think we need to think about the common standard, at least what are the common standard, principle, criteria, indicator, and verification? So how we can monitor or how we can verify the integrity and standard? That demand, I think, I would suggest to formulate a very common type of standard that helps the countries, the multilateral institution, private sector mechanism to move this, carbon credit mechanism forward to help carbon credit and marketing, ultimately to help the carbon or climate change mitigation. So this is my just suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have any takers on the voluntary carbon market search and whether by the time the rules come in, it will be constrained? Anyone wants to take that? I'm looking at you, Marcos.
I must admit I take both very good interventions more like as comments rather than questions. No? And on the first one, in my personal opinion, I do think that everybody will have probably a different opinion. I wouldn't be as concerned about possible constraints. No, I do think we should largely rely on everybody racing to the top, and everybody, as soon as we have a strong, robust framework being still developed, that all the other standards will also try, or particularly those operating in voluntary carbon market, to aim at those higher integrity mechanisms. So I do think that also if you don't adjust to that, there will be also not much demand for those lower quality credits because of the diminished credibility and hence diminished role or usage for those kind of credits. I don't know if that was more or less you were hinting at in the first intervention, in the first question.
Actually, it's not so much about credibility, it's more my concern about the double counting perspective.
So maybe just coming on that, the voluntary side. I think two points to make. I think we used to live in an era where it's very clear what is voluntary and what is compliance. But if I could frame it, I think we currently are moving towards a carbon markets 2.0, where there's no clear distinction between the voluntary and the compliance. Singapore, for example, relies on voluntary markets for our compliance, but it requires it to be eventually Article 6 compliant and correspondingly adjusted for. And the second point, I think Marcos mentioned it as well. I think from a trends perspective, what we see, rightly so in my perspective, is a race to the top rather than a race to the bottom. And my own perspective is that credits that are perceived to be lower environmental integrity would naturally have lower demand. And again, related to the point earlier that I think Julian made about buyer criteria, while you might not have an effective buyer criteria, buyers who participate in the market for lower quality credits will likely face greater scrutiny and criticism. And I think we already see that happening. So that's one aspect of it.
Thank you so much. And VK, I'm going to give you the challenge of just 30 seconds, if you could wrap something up for us. Thanks.
Question on this one? Yeah. Okay. Very basic. We are talking of markets. So market has two components, buyers and sellers, right? So we are talking of compliance markets and voluntary markets. So I think one thing should not be limiting the other one, because there's going to be a definitive demand from the compliance markets, as we've seen previously. And of course, there could be a certain demand for the voluntary credits from the net zero targets. There could, of course, be divided demand for some voluntary, or the corporates may be looking for adjusted credits, and there could be others which may not be looking, or they might be contributing to the NDCs of the other countries, which again will help them to rise up to the top. And I completely agree with Ruben that that there could be different types of credits, and that would be reflected in the prices. And I think the prices are going to be differentiating the type of credits, and that will also affect the demand and therefore the supply of those credits. I think market will take care of that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to our panelists. You've been really patient and kind to share your experiences with us. But let's invite Perumal up on stage to share some of your thoughts, your comments on what you have heard.
You can stand. That's okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Like I always find, I was just making fun with VK, that if you know about the Indian cuisine, in the end, like you always have some pickle. So UNFCCC is always a pickle, right? So it's not exactly desirable, but it's better to have it. So that's my situation always. So I would say that I start with a lighter note. I will not take more than 5 minutes because we have such an august panel, which has representation from the government, which has representation from the multilateral development banks, one of the major front runners in terms of the carbon markets, streamlining or trying to direct how carbon markets might shape. So thanks to Singapore. And we also have Pasang, who is talking about the indigenous people things. And we all talk about capacity, like all the questions that are coming up is in terms of the capacity constraints. So we have Article 6 implementation partnership. What better than this, that you can have a panel which can speak in diversity. I start with this, like my name, I think Elizabeth will know that in Tamil, my name is Arumugam, Perumal Arumugam, so which is 6 faces. So I used to always make fun that when my father, the Almighty, has decided me to be branded to Article 6 with 6 faces. Yeah, because the life is like that, because if you talk about carbon markets, they're all either in multiples of 6 or 6. Article 6 under the Kyoto Protocol is the joint implementation. Article 12 is the clean development mechanism. And now we have Article 6, and I'm Arumugam. So it's always 6. So I would take Article 6 based on what we heard. The 6 shapes is called as hexagon. So I don't want to patronize. I already in this event in Asia Pacific, I patronized to increase carbon market integrity, how a financial transaction has a SWIFT code. You need to have a similar SWIFT code for carbon markets, which I have already expressed. So today I will go for the hexagonal face of the Article 6, the 6 shapes of edges and vertices. The first and foremost, what we learned from the panel is the strong and robust governance. Right? So you need to have a robust governance, whether it's be it voluntary market, be it compliance market. The most fundamental thing for carbon markets to be in, because the foundational thing is that how does carbon market helps towards energy transition. So the first and foremost is the governance system, so which includes many aspects. They spoke about the MRVs, the baselines, the complementarity, etc. One of the things that we haven't covered is in relation to the carbon markets. Like today, what we lack is the appeals and grievances. So Article 6 of the Paris Agreement is bringing in the issues of appeals and grievances at this moment, which is one of the learnings, as Ruben earlier said, that the carbon market is evolving, and one of the gaps is not having an adequate appeals and grievance processes. Once you have registered a project, when it starts running, there is really not a clear feedback mechanism or feedback loop mechanism where one can go and make course correction. So one of that fundamental thing within the governance is the appeals and grievances, and Article 6 is trying to look at that. And we do have a procedure that has been established. Today, no standard that exists on carbon market, they either deal with appeals or they deal with grievances. First time Article 6 is trying to bring both of them together and see how carbon market reacts. The second strong message in the second phase of the hexagon of Article 6 is the localization. That's what I heard in terms of stakeholder inclusivity. How does that you engage every stakeholder? So again, from an Article 6 world, I would like to say that the carbon markets has both local stakeholder consultation and global stakeholder consultation, but not on a continuous basis. Whereas in Article 6, now the new rules that are being adopted has a continuous stakeholder engagement, whereby anytime within the process a stakeholder can air a view on a given project, right? So the second one that I found was in terms of localization, stakeholder interaction, and inclusivity, if the carbon markets has to be integral and had to lead a way for a just transition. The third is the overall accountability. Always when we talk in terms of carbon markets, we talk about environmental integrity. You heard from all of our panelists in terms of supply side integrity, demand side integrity, but we also learned from Pasang today that the overall accountability do not just lie within environmental integrity alone from a carbon market perspective. You need to look at social integrity. You need to look at financial integrity that comes from our friends from the MDBs. And the environmental integrity is the cornerstone of any carbon market. So when you talk about integrity on accountability under the carbon markets, don't isolate environment, social, and financial integrity. Bring everything together, and that consolidated integrity is key for where we have to go. The fourth one, I think that came in is more in terms of, I think it came from the floor as well, is the alignment with the Paris objectives. We are all here under one common objective, which is towards 1.5 degree goal, right, over time. So that's our foundational, whatever we do, either in the carbon market space or any other space, our common objective that has collectively agreed is the 1.5 degree. So here I took 5 sub-elements. One, if you have to align with a Paris Agreement, be transformational, go beyond business as usual, do not go behind as carbon markets. I think that's one of the colleagues from the floor when he asked that, is the cart running ahead of the horse, right, between compliance and voluntary when you talk about. So the most important thing is that don't go behind low-hanging fruits. That also came very strong from Thailand as users, like which they said that we wanted to do everything that is to be done locally, leave it to the local. Don't try to take the low-hanging fruits out and use it in the carbon markets. Don't make our life miserable. We heard it from Malaysia. Again, said carbon markets has to be supporting hard-to-abate sectors. Technology innovation is the areas where carbon market has to play a role, make a transitional and a transformative shift. This is what we again heard from the panel. So that's in terms of alignment to the Paris Agreement objectives. So I covered 4. I will ask a quiz in the end of the 4 phases. So it's the governance, the localization, the overall accountability, alignment with the Paris Agreement goal. The 5th one is the carbon leakage, which we heard. So don't create your own house mess and throw it in somebody else's house, right? So when we are negotiating in Glasgow, one of the things that has been asked by quite a number of ministers is that, is carbon market actually trying to address the supplementarity, right? So I do not want it to leave the responsibility to somebody else in the name of carbon markets. So how does the rules ensure in the carbon market that I clean my own mess first before trying to do something? And that's where the complementarity comes in. That is the 5th phase of the Article 6 rules, which is where you need to provide the supplementarity. Do not try to displace emissions from one jurisdiction to the other in the name of carbon market. And the carbon market has to aid reductions, real reductions, not increase in emissions. So that is the 5th phase, I would say, for Article 6. Last, which we did not hear, I think with Pasang talked about bullet train, which I understood like as when a carbon market, I think that also came from the floor, from John, I think, is in terms of the slow pace in which, because of the complexity, the multiple complexity that Elizabeth talked about, is it delaying things? Really not, right? When countries are trying to establish a meter gauge and a broad gauge railway line, some of the private sectors and our friends wanted to run a bullet train on that. And that's where you very easily derail the system, right? That's what is coming strongly. Like, so there is a time it takes for the governments because things have changed. We have been hearing that what is NDC, what is the implications of NDC when it comes to carbon market. I wanted to take the words of Pasang in terms of don't try to run a bullet train on a meter gauge lane and then say that it is derailing the system. So that primarily is one of the things that you said. And the last one is, which we haven't spoken much, is in terms of always carbon market has its negativity because it is termed as a zero-sum game, right? So you reduce something here, permit someone else to emit elsewhere, so the benefit of the environment is a zero-sum game. It's really not really contributing to reductions. Thanks to my AOSIS friends, we have a new terminology within the Article 6, which is called as the oh my god emissions. Sorry, that's just for a joke. It's called as overall mitigation of global emissions, whereby you do not transfer every single ton from one country to the other. You leave something for the benefit of the environment. This actually helps in two counts. One, because of you are not transferring everything, you are creating a demand, thereby you can increase the ambition. There could be a right price signal that, as VK was saying. So that's one new thing that has come into the carbon markets, where you don't transfer all the 100 tons from your side that you have reduced to another side. You create something for the benefit of the environment, and there is, on a voluntary basis, I'm hopeful that some countries will be increasing, but we are starting with the mandatory phase within the Article 6 of minimum 2% to be sidelined for the purposes of the benefit of the environment. The one thing which we did not hear from the panel is that we are sitting in a complex world of 199 countries. And all 199 countries' needs are not the same. And I can very well vouch that more than 50% of the 199 countries, their efforts are towards adaptation, right? So when you conceive a carbon market, how does the carbon market actually help the adaptation efforts of countries that are in needs? And how does this carbon market mechanism, like if you want to be having a just transition in the energy sector, adaptation also plays key role, because we may say that the energy transition is just a mitigation, but there's quite a lot on adaptation needs to be done. Again, Article 6 is the sixth phase of the hexagon paved way in terms of how does the market contributes towards adaptation efforts as well. We have a mandatory contribution of 5% for adaptation in terms of share of proceeds. We have a financial contribution that you need to make for every 1 ton that you transfer. You need to pay a financial contributions towards adaptation. We have seen from the efforts and the pilots that have been launched by many countries like Singapore, Japan, everywhere people are talking about providing benefits from the markets to the adaptation efforts, how that could go. So I would end by saying that the multilateral rules, I think that's what we learned from here. As a final takeaway, I would say the multilateral rules that are developed under the United Nations are, which we heard from Thailand by saying that we are looking at how Article 6 is being progressing, and we wanted to use that as our reference to beginning point, and we wanted to outperform, and we wanted to go beyond that, because I, as a country, as Thailand, can do more than what 199 countries can collectively agree upon because of our complexity and the diversity, right? So how do we identify unity in diversity within the carbon markets? And two, how can we move forward where the Article 6 rules, which are multilaterally agreed, is used as a common, least common denominator, and how you can outperform. And that addresses the question of how does the voluntary market make a change or make a transformational shift, is that you outperform the collective multilateral system. Don't try to underperform the multilateral system where the compromise was reached with 199 countries in a room. So if you are outperforming them, good. That's the KPI for Article 6 and carbon markets within the UNFCCC framework. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Purma. And with that, I think he's made my job really easy. He summarized it really beautifully. But ladies and gentlemen, would you put your hands together for our very eloquent panel today? Thank you so much. And with that, thank you everyone for your time this morning as well. And if you'd like to stay around, more questions, if you want to pick on the brains of particular panelists, please do so. Thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of the day.